This is Disintegration. We're on Xbox One X, and it is enhanced for a better resolution. There doesn't appear to be any information on that, and no HDR support on this one either, it seems. So this is an interesting title. It's split between a campaign and a multiplayer, the latter of which we will go over later on in this. So the game is a interesting mix of what is a FPS and a RTS, so you're getting a little bit of shooter, a little bit of strategy, and it doesn't really do either of those particularly well. It's a weird mix. I like what they were going for, but I don't know that the execution was 100% interesting, as I do find this game rather boring. It's a bad thing to say, but I think maybe this isn't necessarily something for me, although I quite enjoy FPS titles and I quite enjoy RTS titles. It's a strange hybrid of the two, where you're sort of this passive grav flying pilot, and you're controlling a group of troops. So most of the time they're doing their own thing, aside from light interactions where you're like, hey, throw a stun grenade, a concussion grenade, or send down a barrage of fires, or send up a slow-mo vortex. Things like that. It's interesting. I think those that really enjoy the, kind of like hover bike, flying type things, there was a genre of this a long time ago based around this style of play. I think they'll really like this. But for me, I was kind of like, I just really couldn't get into the campaign. So aside from the gameplay at times being really, really slow-paced and boring, and I want to first say that the multiplayer actually is really interesting, so maybe jump to that part if you want to hear about it. I thought it's pretty cool, but we're focusing on the campaign for now. So the campaign was kind of really hard to play and get into, just in terms of, not only it being a tad, slow and boring, it's also a very generic sort of story that is rather incoherent in my opinion. So you're kind of this pilot character that did this thing to become a robot person. There's a short little start clip. And then you're scavengers, and all of a sudden you're fighting for a resistance group to these people, I think called the Reds or something. They really did get much of a description. I think they have like red eyes, basically, and that's why they're called that. Anyways, so obviously, there's more complexity to it. I didn't get enough out of the story or something. It's just kind of like, it's weird. You meet up with this guy and all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're working with you, and yeah, that's kind of the gist of it, and then it builds outwards in a sort of epic way. I do find that the mission structure is rather interesting because, some of them a little bit shorter, but a good chunk of the missions, are at least like half an hour plus a time. If you die, some of the checkpoints are brutal. Oh man, they get these long survival points that take like 10-20 minutes, and if you die you gotta restart from the beginning. It's annoying. It's really obnoxious actually to have to do that much content over again, even on like a standard normal difficulty. It's tiring. It really is. You gotta like kind of almost want to take a break during missions because they're so long, some of them, and it's just like, I don't know if that was quite the best way to do that. So I wasn't really blown away by the story. I didn't find it too interesting. You do get a good amount of time with it if you can actually stick with it and find it interesting. I mean, you get that kind of potential there, but yeah, no, this one wasn't for me. I had a hard time actually, working through it and trying to enjoy it. Like, I mean, I like some of the combat. At times it's kind of fun flying around while your troops are doing their things. At other times it's like, just, I don't know, not that interesting. You don't really feel like you're a part of the combat, despite, it being a big part of it. And then out of nowhere, you'll just get like huge chunks of your suit damaged, and there's like no chance for you to get out of the way and situate yourself again in order to battle back. See, there's a fine balance you have to play with the shooters, where it's like, okay, I did something bad, I got killed, that's what happens, I have to do something new. Whereas here it's like, oh, dead in half a second, and there's like no chance for you to respond or understand what happened, and then you might have to replay like a 10-15 minute segment again, and you're just like, okay, well, what did I do? You don't get that chance to kind of escape from the situation you're in. as you would in other shooter titles, and that's because this is kind of an RTS. But because an RTS, you're not really controlling things. You don't really feel like you're actively telling them what to do, despite actually having some of those options. They're kind of really autonomous, and I think you have to do that for the type of game this is. And yeah, the campaign, just not quite for me. And if you haven't noticed, we have switched over to the multiplayer aspect. I actually found this rather interesting, but I want to take a brief moment just to talk about the performance. I don't know if you've been seeing that the whole way through, but yeah, it's definitely got some, frame drops and some performance issues, especially during the heavy explosion and combat situations that you see during like campaign or during some of the online action. So the multiplayer is a little bit different. This has a few modes, and there's, you can do quick play, or you can pick your specific mode. These are all basically objective oriented. Sometimes capturing a position, sometimes you're capturing points that drop after you're eliminating foes, and the other one is more of like a position-based capture type thing, which is really neat. And it might sound the same as this, but it's not, because you're kind of like taking something and moving it. It's kind of a bit of a play on capture the flag to a degree, but that is really far removed from what that is. I just want to give a little bit of context in regards to what that one is. Trying to describe it the best I can, having troubles obviously. So in the multiplayer, there's a number of different teams, there's lots of customization, items and stuff that you can unlock. It's actually very fast paced. It takes the slower, cumbersome style of combat, and it just kind of makes it a little bit more high octane, a little bit more of a thrill. You're getting into those battles, and you're needing to be strategic, because you could die quickly, and you gotta move around, use your teammates, use your little troops that you have with you. I think they do the gameplay quite right in this aspect of play. That being said, I'm not certain if there's enough depth where it's like I personally will be investing a lot of time in this one. I do find the multiplayer interesting and actually generally fun to play. I wish that maybe the matches were a little bit longer, because they do seem to go really quick. But I think some of the enjoyment of this multiplayer is the fact that these matches are really fast and you get into a new one. They got a decent selection of maps and interesting focus content of playlists, which I think is a smart choice. Some multiplayer games get a little bit too bloated in regards to how much of a player base they have after a while, and I think this one plays it safe in that regard, and it works out well for it. It is something that is fun, fast paced, decent selection of modes, combat that kind of feels engaging and neat. They got some objectives, so you kind of focus on those. I think just in general, the multiplayer was the better done part of this experience, and I just wish that the campaign chunk had a little bit more of a spice that the multiplayer aspect does have. So together, it's an okay game. It's got some performance problems, and it's not the most exciting thing to play. I think some people, it might fall into a really good niche in regards to being something where it's like, okay, I really dig what this is, I really like what it is, and you're going to have a good time with it, I think. So it really depends. Do you like those kind of grav flying games of the past? This is a good, successor to those, and I think some people might really have fun with this, the RTS elements. It's a neat concept that I don't think the execution was necessarily perfect to be all engaging. So with that, some aspects I really did like. I enjoyed the visuals. I think the thing you're flying in looks cool. I like the little characters that you're fighting, the troops you control. I think they have a good style of visuals, especially in the multiplayer in regards to like customization, picking from the different squads that are available. You get a wide range of weapons. You can modify things like in the campaign. You can modify like your chipsets and stuff with what you find in the world. I think that's kind of cool. I love the destruction elements of the game. I think that was one of my favorite parts that I definitely wanted to highlight. You can really crumble little structures, so you can see things such as concrete, and you can blow it up and little pieces and chunks of it fall off. And I thought that was really interesting, and they did some really neat things with that. And I also love when you kind of explode, so you can see your little guy go flying out of it. You see the ship crumble down into pieces. To me, that was really interesting. So it's the smaller little details that they do a really good job of. And I do think they have a good range of, visual areas. Now, with that, I did notice that there is like pop-in with the grass and campaign, and again, the performance problem. So it could have maybe used a bit more polish just to bump this one up to the next level of quality. Because again, it's okay. It's an alright game. It's nothing too amazing. It's not anything too bad. Like, I don't think that this is something that you could call a bad game, because it's actually fairly well crafted. It's got some interesting aspects to it, but it does have some weaker points that I also think take away from the potential of what this could have been, because it really is a game all by itself. It fits into a sort of niche that I don't think any other title out there really tries, but with that, it doesn't really get the shooter concept perfectly right, and it doesn't get the RTS aspects perfectly right. And I think you kind of need to really be good at one or the other, and it's kind of slicing in the middle didn't pay off in this situation. Maybe there's a way to do it, I don't know, but I think kind of riding that fine line, they didn't quite get the balance to a point that I personally liked. Again, this is something that someone might really enjoy. I have moments here where I'm like, oh, this is a fun game. This is something that can be engaging. And there's other moments where it's like, wow, this is boring. It's a little bit rough at times, you know, dealing with stuff. I don't think that the performance is a huge issue, but it's definitely something, you know, that you're seeing performance issues with, and that's a little bit disappointing. But it does look visually appealing. I liked what they were going for, and I think it's good to experiment like this with titles. It doesn't always pay out for the best, but I think in this regard it paid out for something that I think a select group of people will actually quite enjoy. Others will find boring, and for the majority, you know, you'll find it as an interesting experiment, maybe something to check out, because it's different. It's a very different sort of game, and I want to get that across, that it is alright, it's okay, has some drawbacks, but I think they were ambitious, a little bit too ambitious, but they did do something that was a little bit neat and different in Disintegration.